Welcome to another edition in our conversation series. I'm Charles Powell. The Ansari Institute presents Engaged, Religion and the Common Good, a conversation series exploring questions relating to global affairs and the human condition. The series covers a variety of topics, from poverty and peace to climate change and good governance, as well as tradition and technology. Our conversations engage local and global partners, including students, educators, and journalists. Today, a pastor. Today, I'm joined by Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac, a well-known Palestinian Lutheran pastor. He is the pastor of Christmas Lutheran Church in Bethlehem, the academic dean of Bethlehem Bible College, the director of Christ at the Checkpoint, and is heavily involved in Kairos Palestine and grassroots work among Palestinian Christians. Pastor Isaac, welcome to the conversation. Tell us, what was it like growing up in Palestine?
Thank you, Charles, and thanks for having me in this conversation. I grew up in a town called Beit Sahur, known more as the Shepherd's Field, widely believed as the site of the biblical event on when the angels appeared to the shepherds. It's just a couple of miles from Bethlehem. So you could say, I grew up in biblical places. And when people ask me, how does that feel? Honestly, we don't think of it as anything, we're in the biblical sites, because growing up is my most clear memories growing up are of the conflict of the first Palestinian uprising, for example, the second Palestinian uprising when I was a bit older. The clashes that used to take place between Palestinian rioters throwing rock at the Israeli soldiers almost on a daily basis in our town, and in the neighborhood of Bethlehem, the strikes, school closures. So growing up, I grew up in this context of military occupation, and our people, the Palestinians, engaged in a nonviolent kind of activities to resist the occupation through demonstrations and through marches. Part of it was exciting. Part of it was, you run away from soldiers, or you try to avoid the soldiers when there is strict curfews, meaning we can't leave the house and so on. Part of it is scary, where, I remember just laying on the ground when there are shooting around the house. And so this is the kind of environment I grew up with.
Would you say that this environment that you grew up in, is it very similar? Was it very similar for all the children living in your region?
Yes, this is a typical Palestinian experience. In fact,
and Pastor, it's very, I think about it, it's very traumatizing for a young child to grow up like this. What sort of help have people been able to get to cope with this?
Yeah, it's generational. You have to remember that this is not one generation only kind of experience. Our Palestinian experience, the modern Palestinian experience, some would argue, started in the Nakba in 1948. Nakba is an Arabic word for catastrophe. That left more than half of the population of Palestine back then as refugees. And then we had the 1967 war. And we deal with these wars one after the other, and with the experience of exile and refuge one at a time. And it's generational. The way we deal with it is through community. We are a strong community-oriented people. We have a strong support system with one another. I remember, for example, when schools were closed, when I was a child, we immediately organized homeschools for each neighborhood. And, parents volunteered to teach, and we used to go from one house to the other. when there is curfew, we couldn't leave the house, then the children would escape and bring food to one family if we knew that one family needed food, and so on. And then, of course, in our case as Christians, the church has always been more or less a refuge, even though even church experience was not always without its difficulties. I don't know if that's if that was telling of every child, or was it just my experience. I grew up reading the Bible at a very early age. I'm, one you might call a Bible nerd, and from an early age, I had problems because it looked as if God is siding with one people over the other. So we've had questions with the Bible, which led me to this long journey that continues even today in my research time of what does really the Bible say about conflicts, about Israel, Palestinians, the situation, how to deal with tension, how to relate to enemies. What does loving the enemy mean? In our context, that's not just simply a nice phrase that Jesus said that applies to how you deal with your noisy neighbors next door. No, I mean, we have real enemies who literally took away our possessions, our land, our even narrative, and so how do you deal with that, especially as it continues?
And this really leads us into the next question that I have for you. You hold a BS in civil engineering, yet you would eventually decide to enter into vocational ministry. You earned an MA in religion and biblical studies from Westminster Theological Seminary in Philadelphia, and then went on to earn a PhD at the Oxford Center for Mission Studies in Oxford, England. Your particular area of study was a biblical theology of the promised land. Share with us and you've already done a bit of this, but share with us more. What inspired you to leave behind civil engineering and pursue this ministerial work?
Yeah, well, during my university days, I was heavily involved in activities related to Christian ministries among students, organizing events. But then at the same time, my years at Birzeit University were the years of the Palestinian Second Intifada, Second Uprising, which was a very, very, very tense period. Lots of violence, many people died on both sides, invasions to Palestinian towns, and lots of checkpoints controlling our lives as Palestinians. I remember spending long hours at checkpoints and literally battling hatred. How do you deal with this? And I always thought I want to do something to our people. I can't just sit and watch. And in a naive way, and maybe in an innocent way, I thought studying theology is something good, that I could use that to help my people, without really knowing what I want to do. And so upon completing my degree, I just thought I want to head to ministry, not knowing where that will lead me. And really where I am right now is way unexpected in terms of what I planned in the beginning or why I want to do that. What I found today is that there is so much need for the church to step in, to have a voice, to have both locally and internationally. The title of my thesis, as you read it, has to do with the promised land, because religion has been brought into the conflict, whether we like it or not. I don't think it's not, I don't believe at all that it is a religious conflict. It's a conflict it's a political conflict on territory. It's a reality of oppression of one people occupying and controlling the other. However, religion was brought into it because the Zionist movement chose Palestine as a homeland for the Jewish people because of the biblical ties. And over the years, we kept meeting Christians from all over the world who held to a belief that the land belongs to the Jewish people because God promised it to them, which might sound exciting for someone in Kentucky doing Bible study and talking about prophecy. To us, it's deeply problematic because this is a land that we've owned and farmed for hundreds of years. What do you mean that God just excuse me for not getting the memo that God promised this land thousands of and a year ago. And even as a Bible believing person, that didn't sound good. That didn't sound right. So we had to study the Bible and try to answer this question. Did God really promise this land to a certain ethnic group or religious group, and that promise is valid forever, regardless of any circumstances, and that land has certain boundaries and so on? So I ended up writing my PhD on the topic, and found myself not just writing on this, but debating many, mainly evangelical Christians and others about this topic. Because to us, what's at stake is not just, it's the credibility of the gospel witness in our land. It's our presence as a church. It's our continuous presence as a church. It's very convenient for, as I said, someone to write in a conference movement, in a prophecy conference, or a church donating money to help Jews immigrate to our land to facilitate the second coming of Christ and so on. But for us, what's at stake is our existence. Because what is the suggestion? Should we leave? Because you believe God gave this land to the Jewish people. And is there a room for the Palestinians, at least in that theology? So this has been more or less, in addition to pastoring, a career of mine, whether through Christ at the Checkpoint, the Bible College, the multiple conferences we speak at, or personal meetings with church leaders, to challenge such approaches on multiple levels. First, does the Bible really say that? And second, let's for the sake of argument, accept that it says that. What about the consequences on the ground for Palestinians?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned a few moments ago, you are a well-known speaker on Palestinian theology and the theology of the land. Moreover, you are active with Kairos Palestine, as well as a blogger. You travel around and engage in dialogue with Palestinians as well as non-Palestinians. And I wonder if you can share with us, what questions are your dialogue partners most interested in? And additionally, what are some of the major concerns, especially as they relate to the Israeli-Palestinian relationship?
Yeah, here in Palestine, our message continues to be one of hope, one of persistent, even resilience. We are engaged in a very difficult task of convincing people not to leave. One of the most pressing problems we're facing right now is the immigration of young Palestinians, both Muslims and Christians, because the current living standards under occupation, under what many organizations are calling apartheid, many international organizations, human rights organizations, Palestinian activists, and so on. Because there's so much, not just discrimination, but control of our lives. So we're trying to give a message of hope and persistent that, in particular, when it comes to the Christian witness, we can't leave. We have to continue a Christian presence in this land against all odds. And we have to do it not on big scale, but on small initiatives, on small program here, a project here, a family starting business here, a church project there, and so on. Because the overall picture doesn't look good. And now we're just focusing on small baby step stories of success. And in doing so, we're creating, hopefully, we're aiming to create hope. And when it comes to our engagement with global partners, I would say it varies, Charles. We have strong allies in the global South, in India and South Africa, who always encourage us, and when we compare minutes or compare notes when it comes to our theology versus their theology, we find a lot of similarity because of the shared experience of living under quote unquote empire. The shadow of dominant powers controlling our realities, even our narratives, our theology. So engaging with South African theologians, Latin American, even African American, and even Indian, the Dalit movement has been very, very kind of encouraging breath air for us. But at the same time, we engage with church leaders from the West. Some are supportive, but the majority are not. The majority still look at the Holy Land through the lens of Israel and the Jewish people. And you have to understand something, that once Israel was created in 1948, from our perspective, at least as Palestinians, something happened, which is we were replaced as the people of the land. Even the church that kept the Christian witness, the biblical side, the biblical narrative, with Israel and the Jewish people. And we became secondary. Even when it comes to preserving a Christian witness or a church, there's so much investment in Israel, in Israeli projects, and there's so much, giving Israel a clean pass to when it comes to breaking the international law, occupying Palestinian land. We ask churches to just act upon, our principles of justice, of equality, of human rights. Does that matter? Do these things matter? If you wish, a shift from prophecy to justice, to ethical engagement with the country. What does it mean to be peacemakers? And even a lot of churches who want or talk about peace many times are using an expression I learned from South African friends. They are toothless. They bite, but they don't hurt, meaning, we pray for peace. We hope that there will be one day a Palestinian state, but we want to take a position about, for example, the settlements, which is, taking our land. Would you respond to the reports that have been calling Israel an apartheid state? Multiple reports. How do you respond to that? And most churches don't want to engage in anything controversial. And to us, it's also problematic because at least the way I read Jesus is, when I put it this way, was Jesus controversial, or was there anything that Jesus did that was not controversial? So why is it that many Christians avoid maybe speaking truth to power? So sometimes it's a difficult conversation, to be honest. Sometimes we are pulled away. We have been silenced. We have been, there has been, multiple incidents that I spoke about in my book, not just for me, but others, of being, for example, invited to speak in a place, then having that invitation withdrawn because you're a Palestinian and it's controversial. And this is a pattern. We have been even attacked by Christian organizations and churches because, we speak for justice for Palestinians. We're troubled by this polarizing worldview where everything is black and white, a conflict between good and evil, with good being the Judeo-Christian tradition and the evil being Islam. And in that ideology, you dehumanize the whole people, Arabs, Muslims, they're part of the problem, without asking the difficult questions. What is happening on the ground? What actually happened? And, just accepting simplistic narratives is part of the problem, to be honest. And so we encourage people, come and talk, come and see things on the ground, engage in conversations on all levels, history, politics, theology, before you make judgments about people.
So let's talk about your latest book, The Other Side of the Wall, a Palestinian Christian Narrative of Lament and Hope. The Palestinian people have suffered grave injustices, as you've mentioned, and yet many of them hold out hope for a just peace to emerge from the carnage. Some even aspire to befriend and love Jewish and Muslim neighbors. To not be heard is perhaps one of the most traumatizing experiences one can encounter. To be sure, the Palestinians are involved in a communication dance with Israel and the greater world audience. There are so many voices, and it seems to me that most of those voices are telling the Palestinians what they can say and what they cannot say, or what they can do and what they cannot do. And frankly, many conversations are happening without the Palestinian voice at the table. But Palestinian emotions, communication style, and beliefs stem from their experiences. I teared up when I read your invitation for your readers, and I quote, to step into the other side of the wall and listen to our stories and perspective. You go on to write, it is my humble request to you to allow me to share how Palestinians experience God, read the Bible, and have been touched and liberated by Jesus, a fellow Bethlehemite who has challenged us to see others as neighbors and love them as ourselves. And you go on to say, this book paints a picture of our story of faith, lament, and hope. And I invite you to join and listen on our side of the wall, end quote. So, Pastor Isaac, we are listening. Please tell us more about this book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Let me tell you about the title of the book, and what you read is important, because one of the things I tried to explain in the book is that walls exist before they are constructed. And we've always been on the other side of the wall, meaning we've always been dismissed and ignored as Palestinians. The whole idea of speaking about our land as land without people, as if we don't exist, even though, you know, everyone knew that the land had always people. But our presence is deemed irrelevant, unimportant. There are more important things. We've always been on the other side of the wall when we are discredited. It's so hard to speak as a Palestinian because you always have as if to qualify yourself. I don't believe in that, I don't believe in this, and you know, put 10 qualifications before you are allowed to speak, and oftentimes someone else has to give the counter story. Oftentimes we are labeled. You know, it's as if the wall has labels on it from the Israeli side, where it says, you know, terrorist, anti-Semitic. In theology, they could say replacement theology. All sorts of labels have been put on us, all to discredit us and to stop people from having a conversation. And I compared that to the actual experience of the millions of pilgrims who visit the Holy Land on an annual basis, the majority of whom spent at best 2 to 3 hours in Bethlehem, waiting in line to visit the Nativity Church, because usually there is a long line. And they're told to be careful because they're going to the Palestinian territories. And usually those who spend nights here are more than surprised with the hospitality, the kindness, the community aspect of the Palestinian life here, and the deep and rich culture. So my argument is that we've always been on the other side of the wall. And when churches speak about our land, they speak about it as if it's empty. Would people take our perspective, even when holding conversations on the land? As you said, there have been conferences where it's a discussion on the land and the people and the conflict and so on, and there were no Palestinians present. Even in seminaries, no Palestinian Christians present. We're missing in conversations and theology books, and we want to say, you know, please come and see reality from our side. Here to our pain experience, but not just pain, to our stories of hope, because we are a truly resilient people. Stepping into our side of the wall could be a transformative experience, not to us, but even to those who come and listen to these stories and see God at work. Over the years, as I said, we've developed ways of reading scripture that aids us, and we find, you know, to me, when you read the Bible with these eyes, you discover that the Bible is actually excellent. It was written in a context of empires. The Bible was written by, you know, occupied people. It speaks about justice and mercy, and you know, even statements like in the Christmas narrative, God with us, Emmanuel. The way I read it, God is with us on our side of the wall. God is with us when we are oppressed, when we're suffering. I mean, read the Song of Mary in Luke chapter 1, where it seems as if God takes sides with. So it's clear that this side of the story, this side of theology even, is missed. And sadly, there is this, what I call mythical narrative about the land. Mythical narrative in that, Jews returned to their homeland. It was empty. They were exiled. And then 2,000 years later, they returned. They built a state. And then enemies of Israel came to destroy it. And God will intervene, and because they're God's people. And, and not only isn't that factually true and historically true in terms of an empty land, there were people in the land. What do you suggest that we do as the Palestinians who've been living? I mean, I always tell people who use the language of Jews return to their land. And let me ask you something, Charles. Sorry to put you on the spot, but imagine if someone knocks your door and he's like, yes, can I help you? And he says, well, I'm just returning. This is my house. How would you feel? So even, in the simple language of Jewish return, it puts us at a very difficult place as Palestinians, especially when it's not qualified. The language of divine right to the land, because if Jews have a divine right to the land, does that mean that we as Palestinians are fighting God? And it's interesting, Christians are not comfortable when Muslims use this language, but we're comfortable applying it to Israel and so on. So, we want to challenge perspectives, but we also want to offer counter narrative on how we live and how we understand God, the Bible. And if you read my book, there's so much on the Sermon on the Mountain, which I think is the most important text that aids our existence here in this land and so on.
And again, for our listeners, the book is titled The Other Side of the Wall, a Palestinian Christian Narrative of Lament and Hope. We certainly do hear you, and we hear your narrative, and I appreciate you sharing these very personal stories with us. American evangelicals represent anywhere from 30 to 35% of the American population. Among international issues, few are more important than the well-being of the Jewish people and the security of the Israeli state. Wheaton College New Testament professor Gary Burge, recently retired, wrote in his book, Whose Land, Whose Promise? What Christians Are Not Being Told About Israel and Palestinians. He wrote, quote, the vast majority of evangelicals instinctively believe that a vigorous support of Israel is the only appropriate response to the conflicts in the Middle East, something that you've already made reference to. Moreover, their stance has little to do with history, less to do with politics. The average believer, he writes, sitting in the pew is persuaded that such support is God's will. The Jews are God's people, and they are returning to the land God promised them, end quote. Of course, and as I think you said a few moments ago, this is not the whole story, but what would you say to your Christian brothers and sisters who are evangelical regarding Palestinian rights to self-determination and statehood?
Yeah, I would say, I would invite them to first step to our side of the wall, experience life as we experienced it, listen to stories, and maybe, simply ask, what would you do if you were in our place? Put yourself in our shoes and tell us, what you just suggest we do. So that's the first thing I would say. Before especially, judging or condemning or, calling out Palestinians. Recently, I was in a room with closed meeting, and there were many Southern Baptists in it, and Southern Baptists are heavily involved in this support of Israel. And one Southern Baptist theologian who had the opportunity to live in Jordan in the Middle East, and he said something to his fellow Southern Baptists: if we Americans experience 10% of what Palestinians went through, we would do much, much more than what they are doing. And this was the testimony of someone who lived in the Middle East and understands the things on the ground. So, please, and sorry to put it in, educate yourself, listen to stories before you make judgments. And second, it's the credibility of our Christian witness that is at stake here. because you know, a lot of these evangelical Christians have made it hard for us as Christians to live here, whether it's through their support to Israel or whether through the way the Christian message is now perceived by even our Muslim neighbors. But more so, you know, have made our lives more difficult when, you know, because just think of this for a moment, that, and this is not hypothetical, Charles, this is true, in that land is confiscated from Palestinian Christian families. And when I say confiscated, I'm talking about families who've owned land and farmed this land for years. And then Jewish settlements are built on that land. We don't have right to go there, even build there. Yet Jewish immigrants from around the world, Russia, Ethiopia, can have the right to immigrate, sometimes funded by these evangelical churches, live there, have more rights than us. And we say, is this fair? Please, is this the gospel? Is this, you know, what is the gospel? What is the good? How do we talk about God in such a way? And finally, I would say this, you know, imagine if all the energy, the investments, the money, the political lobbying that evangelicals have put in support for Israel, imagine if that is channeled for to create momentum for peacemaking, to challenge injustice. I believe we could have made a difference. And that's really the sad point of this, is that it's a wasted potential and investment in that, you know, and I'll put it very bluntly, and I strongly believe this, the church has been part of the problem, the Western church. And I hope that they can channel that, you know, we want you to stand for truth, for justice. None of us is saying, let's destroy Israel or kick the Jews out. That's not the message. There are right now around 7 million Palestinians and 7 million Israeli Jews living in this land. There is no other way than to share this land. Help us do this rather than taking sides or making sure that one side continues to oppress the other, as is the case. And again, I think the credibility of our Christian witness is at stake if we continue to ignore what Israel is doing on the ground, especially in the wake of the numerous reports about that document Israel breaking the international law, and, as I said, using the language of apartheid. The church has to stand, and the response cannot be, oh, these are liberal left-wing organizations. I mean, read the reports. There are plenty. There are numerous, even United Nations reports and so on. And ask yourself, can I be at peace with myself with this, with what's happening? And is this what the gospel or the Bible promotes? So this would be, you know, my challenge. And I'll end it again with what you said. Come and let's have a conversation, whether here or anywhere else. We're always open for conversation.
Reverend Dr. Isaac, thank you for spending a few minutes with us and sharing your perspectives. If you would like to hear more, you are invited to a lecture by Dr. Isaac on Tuesday, April the 18th, 2023, from 4 until 5 p.m. in Jenkins Nanovic Halls. The lecture will be on the topic, and listen closely, the Holy Hand, not the Holy Land, but the Holy Hand, Empires and the Bible, a Palestinian Christian perspective. This event is co-sponsored by the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion and the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. Pastor Munther, it has been my honor to speak with you. Do you have any final words?
Just to again say thank you. We don't take for granted any opportunity to speak and to share our message. We're in the season of Lent. It's a time to come close to God, and it's a time in which we remember that God is in solidarity with us, especially when we are suffering, especially when we are in pain. So thank you again, and I hope to see you when I'm in your university in Notre Dame.
And I look forward to seeing you in a few days. Thank you, and may God bless you.